Hello, everyone. Welcome to Call and Response. I'm Siobhan McGuire, and I'm very pleased to welcome you here today. Our speaker today is Kyle Cawthorn of GIA Publications. Before I introduce Kyle, I'll mention that the entire One License team, the small but mighty One License team is here. Y'all could give a little wave there. And also, Alex Salazar from OCP is joining us today. Hello, Alex. Thanks for being here today. Madison Connor and David Taba from One License are going to be assisting today. And Madison has some housekeeping tips for us.
We collected your questions from your registration forms, so thanks for submitting those. Also, Dave and Siobhan and I will be fielding your chatted questions and sharing them with Kyle. Keep an eye on the chat as David will be dropping some helpful links and resources for you there. If we don't get to your question, or if our discussion inspires additional questions later this week, feel free to email us at info@onelicense.net or call us at 800-663-1501. If we don't answer the phone when you call in, please leave a message. We answer every single voicemail message and email message that we receive. If you would like to turn on your video, we would welcome that. If you prefer to leave the camera off, that's fine too. If you'd like to ask a question, you can unmute your microphone or type your question into the chat. To help with sound quality, we'll ask you to mute your microphone when you are not speaking. Should you need to ask an account-related question, it's possible that demographic information, such as address, phone numbers, and email addresses, could be visible through our screen sharing. So please keep that in mind. One last note, our next call and response will be in October, and the topic will be searching the database. Keep an eye out for the September newsletter for that registration link.
Thanks, Madison. So Kyle, we're so honored that you're joining us today. We're so grateful for your expertise and your time. And so maybe you'd say a word about yourself and your role at GIA. And then I know we've shared some of our registrants' questions with you already. Maybe you could jump in with that as well.
Of course. Thank you, Siobhan. Thank you all for taking the time to have this conversation today. My name is Kyle Cawthorn. I'm the permissions editor for GIA Publications here in Chicago, Illinois. I've been with GIA since 2012. So in that time, I've learned quite a bit about what copyright is and what it isn't, and in particularly the delicate balance between intellectual property and the public domain. So I like to think of public domain as the material that belongs to everyone. No one can really own something once it enters public domain. Think of the plays of Shakespeare or these great works that have come to us through the ages. We're able to build on those creative works and enjoy the fruits of the labors of people that have come before us. At the same time, those that are sort of recent or contemporary creators, we want to be sure that we're compensating them for their expertise, their musical work, their gifts, whatever they might be, visual and otherwise. So that's how I like to think of copyright and why something can't just enter public domain 5 minutes after something has been created. Certainly the creator can choose to do that, but certainly we as publishers might not want to do that. So let's see. Before we jump into any questions, I just want to just mention that I am by no means a legal expert. I am not at all a lawyer. So this is a little bit of legal information. It is not legal advice. So take my words with a grain of salt or don't. But I'm just here to help and shed some light on what can be a sort of a tricky subject when people aren't that familiar with it. So why do we have copyrights? Well, the U.S. Congress first passed a copyright law in 1790, and the term was only for 14 years. And that initial term could then be extended for another 14 years if the copyright holder was still living. So it's a relatively brief amount of time compared to where we are today. Through the years, I'm not going to go through everything, But that has grown, that protection has grown quite substantially. As recent as 1998, you might remember those Sonny Bono copyright laws, the Mickey Mouse copyright laws, where the current copyright protection was extended from 75 years to 95 years after the publication for a corporate work for hire. So that actually allowed some things to stay in public domain and sort of to stay in copyright. And there weren't materials that would enter public domain for about 20 years because of that extension. So it's really only been in the past, 4 or 5 years where we've seen things enter the public domain as of January 1 of the current year. There might be certain exceptions to that, and particularly in certain parts of the world where their understanding of copyright might be a little bit different. If the author or the composer lived a very long life, and that I'm thinking of Ralph Vaughan Williams, other composers. Their work might have entered public domain here in the U.S., but it might be protected by copyright in Europe and Canada, elsewhere. So just wanted to mention that there may not be hard and fast rules for how we can determine whether something is in public domain. Taking a step back from all of that, sort of the general overview, how does this work with hymnals, with folks that are in liturgical music, in sacred music, in music ministry? What does that mean for us? Essentially, you can look in your hymnal products, your missals, whatever material you're using, and you can by and large trust that the publisher is steering you in the right direction. We want to make sure that people know what music that we publish, what is still protected by copyright and what isn't. So there are certain telltale signs. If you see that there are composer birth and death years, and those are clearly before the 20th century, that's a pretty good bet that that's public domain material. There can be materials that are in the public domain that have been arranged, adapted, harmonized. There are different protections that can be added where the source material itself, let's say the text or the melody line, might have entered public domain, but there's still an element that is protected by copyright. And so we display that in our own products, and I know that other publishers do likewise, just to help make it clear to folks, what it is that where that copyright situation is. So let's see. So when we're thinking about public domain and how that works with One License, when One License first began as a service, it was essentially reprinting, the permission to reprint. We didn't have the luxury of podcast streaming. We didn't have the practice tracks. This was sort of One License 1.0, if you want to think about it that way. And we developed a way to post public domain materials as a convenience to our customers once One License sort of merged with, I think it was Hymprint at the time. So a little bit of ancient history there for you. But so when that capability was made available, we wanted to be able to post our image files from hymnal products of things that are in public domain as a convenience to the folks that then download those and input them into their own worship aids. So there was a way for us as member publishers to designate that material as public domain. That would remove it from the royalty pool so that these public domain items wouldn't be receiving any income generated from reporting usage by customers, so that we could make sure that the materials that are protected by copyright would receive their fair share and nothing more, nothing less, with the addition of these public domain materials. So that's why you will find things in the One License title database that are public domain. We want to include those as a service, as a convenience to our customers. As this service has grown, we've had to sort of nuance, particularly through the pandemic. I would see a lot of manual submissions in our title queue about, finding a public domain hymn, but wanting to report that harmonization. And in a streaming service, and we have, as a publisher, built that as we've been able to, so that customers can find those harmonizations, those arrangements, and report them more efficiently. That is an ongoing task. That's something that we're very much an independent publisher, so we don't have a staff that's here 24/7 adding all of our materials. But I attend to that as I'm able. But it is very important. We want to make sure that those arrangers, those harmonizers, those folks receive their fair share of income from the use of their works too. So I know that's quite a bit of information that I've led with. So I'll pause here and maybe we can jump into some questions if that's all right, One License team.
If we're singing from the hymnal, do we need to report that usage?
Well, I would say that it depends on what you're doing. If you're in your church and you have purchased copies of that hymnal, you're not reprinting anything, you're not podcasting, you're not streaming, nothing is being recorded and broadcast out anywhere, even on a church Zoom call. If it's all staying in that premises, there's no reason to report. You've purchased that hymnal, you're not reprinting anything, as I said. So One License isn't there to police any sort of public performance in a live worship space that's exempt from copyright law protection.
Excellent. Yeah, that's helpful. And then if we're, so here's a question: how to report hymns. We use the Methodist hymnal, but often I find only other people's versions of copyrighted hymns. So I choose one of those hymnals when I report the title. Does that make sense? Sorry.
I think so. So from what I'm hearing, the license holder has a denominational hymnal that hasn't been indexed. The data is not present on One License.
Sounds like.
Yeah. So this is more common than certainly than I would like. It's great when you can find the resource there, but that's really the choice of the denominational publisher. If that publisher, if they're not a member publisher of One License, if they don't really have an active, maybe that's a little bit of a bias on my part, but if their relationship isn't as strong with One License, if they don't see the need to index their hymnal, through this service, then that's entirely up to the publisher. We've made it a priority to make sure that as our products are rolled out, that we want to make sure that our customers can find those materials and can determine, oh, this is covered by One License. This hymnal, this hymn number in this hymnal isn't there, so that's a good sign that, well, that's not a title that's covered under One License. So we're very careful with that. Other publishers, I can't really speak to their particular reasons for not opting to do that, but I can think of at least a handful of various denominational hymnals that just simply haven't been indexed. But there are other resources. Hymnary.org is a great one that I refer to from time to time.
Yeah, so I think, Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like, it's one thing to upload your copyrights as a publisher to the database. It's another thing to index your hymnal with respect to your copyrights in the database. And then it's yet another thing to index all those other hymns in your hymnal that might be covered by other member publishers, but not by you as the publisher. So like in this case, this license holder is looking for a hymn, and they're not finding it indexed in their hymnal, but they are finding it in the database. And as long as it's in the database, it doesn't matter what downloadable files are associated with that database record. They found it in the database and they can report that one. Am I summarizing?
Yes.
GIA and One License. So I want to ask you, yeah.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So you explained that beautifully. So yes, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay. So when you search the database, you're looking for a match for just the title and the contributor and the copyright holder, just those three things. And if there's other information in the database record or other information on your hymnal page, just for purposes of matching your hymnal or your score to the database, you only need to match title, contributor, and copyright holder. So you can disregard, gosh, that's not my hymnal. That downloadable file isn't my hymnal. Well, that downloadable file doesn't have anything to say about whether or not it's covered by one license. You've got a match for what you want to use and what you're finding in the database. So you can report that title. Yeah. Coolio, thanks. All right, so let's go up here. I've got a kind of a specific public domain question. So this license holder says, I think we're not supposed to report public domain music, but it seems strange to me to have performed a search for the piece and find the piece in the database, but it says public domain. And so then I stopped searching. It seems like I haven't really done what I'm supposed to do. So maybe you could say a word about, well, I'm sorry, that's you sort of address it in your opening comments, right? Why there might be public domain stuff. So if maybe you could say a word about how you know before you begin the search, whether something is in the public domain or under copyright. How would you evaluate your score or hymnal page?
Sure. So the first thing I would look for is that copyright symbol. Whether that's on the page of music itself, if it's in the back matter or the front matter of a hymnal or products. As I mentioned, publishers either are or very certainly should be very careful about labeling what is protected by copyright. So if you're looking there just to verify, what it is that you're wanting to report, and if there is no copyright symbol, if there is a copyright symbol, but the year is very much in the past, that might be something to double check. That might have fallen into public domain. Certainly, if it's in the early part of the 20th century, then there's a chance that it might have fallen into public domain. But I would say that it sort of gets into a point of splitting hairs. We of course want people to be as accurate as they can be, to do the right thing and submit as much as they can, try to be as accurate as possible in their reporting. At the end of the day, if you happen to miss something, if you think you've got it right and you're just not quite sure, there's no problem with submitting a manual submission to the publisher, and then on our end we can take a closer look. We can see what's available in the comments there, what the customer is looking for, why they can't seem to find it. And then that helps, at least for me, that helps me to think like a license holder. I don't often do that. I don't always do that. And maybe revise that title and make it something that's a little easier to find, add some more criteria to sort of build up that title. But I would say, if you're just trying to report Amazing Grace, why? It's clearly, but if it's a harmonization on New Britain, or if it's the choral reflection on Amazing Grace, there are so many works that have been built on these old gems, these traditional favorites of ours, that are still protected, and we want to make sure that that those creators receive just income from your use of that work. So how can you tell? Do your best to look at the copyright information that's there. If you're still not sure, send it to the publisher. Maybe check with one licensed staff. I don't want to commit you, but
nope, absolutely. That's why we call that job security. Please reach out to us. We are very happy. We are what do I want to say? Constitutionally wired, each of us, to be helpful, and so we really get a kick out of that. But also keep those cards and letters coming. We like to help. Yeah. Good. Yeah, thanks. Madison and David, do we have anything in the chat, or do we have other questions from the registration forms? What are we doing here?
So far there's nothing going on in the chat.
Excellent. All right. How about Okay, so I think we just addressed this one. Even when I have the copyright information, it's often hard to identify the correct title among the multiple titles by the same author and contributors. How do we determine which one to report? So I would say that's a good question. So you're looking in the database and you see more than one that might be a match. You just want to make sure that you're matching for title, contributor, and copyright holder. And if you see more than one that's a match, you can report any one of them. That would be fine. Does that sound right to you, Kyle?
I think so. I think for me, the most critical parts are the contributor, because that's how the publisher is paying our authors and composers. You know, if the name isn't right, then we're sending it to the wrong person.
Yeah, right. Good. Yeah, and that's a good point. So if the title and the contributor is a match, but the copyright holder is different, copyrights can change hands. Is that right? So maybe on your original score, so and so owned the copyright, but since then it's changed hands.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay. So here's a question, a clarification for what can be used online. Not a very specific question, but maybe you can take that in whatever direction you like.
Let's see. What can be used online?
Mm-hmm. Like in your online worship. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's been a minute since I have looked at the podcast streaming terms, but in general, you'll see on a title those I think there are four icons to the right of a title. Reprint, practice track, and then podcast streaming. Both the what is it, the
Two practice tracks, right?
practice track, and then oh yes, and user generated practice track. That's what it is. Thank you. Podcast streaming is so it may be that a member publisher is not fully on board with podcast streaming and they limit to reprint only. That's the wish of the publisher. So that's a contractual limitation. And I can't necessarily speak to that, but I would say that even in a publisher's own catalog, there may be certain titles where we're able to offer podcast streaming, or we might have a reason why we can't. So you might find titles, even in the GIA catalog or in our sort of umbrella of copyrights, where we can offer only limited rights for something. So that might be something where, by and large, I would say our copyrights. I can't think of one that isn't podcast streaming enabled off the top of my head. But okay. In some of our other sort of subcatalogs or World Library catalog, I know there are at least a few where we just can't offer that podcast streaming use. So then that wouldn't be able to be incorporated in an online worship setting without additional permission from the copyright holder. So just because one license can't offer it, that doesn't mean that you can't reach out to the individual publisher or copyright holder to try to still obtain that permission.
Yeah, oh, that's good. Yeah, so one license can help you with about three things. So congregational reprint, online worship, and then those practice tracks, commercial tracks, for rehearsal purposes, commercial tracks or self-made tracks. But then there's all other kinds of permissions that the copyright holder would then manage, not through one license, but in-house. And then, if something isn't available through one license, as Kyle says, perhaps the copyright holder can make a separate agreement with you outside of your one license permissions. Good. That's a helpful insight. All right.
Stefan, we have a question
Excellent.
in the chat.
Great.
A question that came up to me was, can we explain why there are sometimes duplicate SKU numbers in the system?
Kyle, can you talk about how the SKU numbers are selected? You probably have your own process, but I think you're familiar with the other options that other member publishers might have.
Yes.
So well.
The SKU is it's left open to the publisher to decide what sort of alphanumeric code they want to provide. or if they don't want to have one, one license will generate one. When you're creating a title, it will just make a really long SKU.
Oh,
So I try to avoid that, just because it's really doesn't help anyone. So I try to come up with SKUs that make sense to us and to the license holder. Um, but there's really no rhyme or reason necessarily to the format of that. I think it's more to do with how the publisher might track that in their own royalty processing, on their end, what they do in order to track those titles. But it is certainly very possible for a single title to have multiple SKUs, multiple instances. I personally try to avoid that because it can be confusing when you are just looking to find the right title. I try to avoid that whenever possible, but it does happen. And so there may be particular reasons why we want to have a title that has, I'm thinking of like the Hymnal 1982, their service music section, which was only recently indexed, I think, on one
Yeah.
license. Great to see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
At least in the GIA world, I've gone through at least the service music section to link up our existing titles with what's indexed for that hymnal. But through the years, there have been other manual submissions that have come through, and my predecessors have accepted titles with variations, whether it includes that S number, like S191 or something, or, if it references that hymnal, and we're not going to take that out of the database because it was useful to license holders then. It might still be useful to license holders now. There's no reason for us to make it a hard and fast rule to avoid all of these multiple SKUs. But as I said, I try not to add them superfluously.
Yeah. So just like there might be more than one database record, more than one SKU for a single title, also there might be a single SKU number that is assigned to more than one title from different publishers. And in that case, if you enter a SKU and into the title search, so you can search by title or tune or composer or SKU on license in that title field. If you enter a SKU into that title field and it calls up more than one record, then don't be alarmed by that. That just says that SKU has been arbitrarily assigned to more than one title by the member publisher for each of those titles. And then you can just select the one that matches for title, contributor, and copyright holder, title and contributor being the two most important. So don't be alarmed. I'm looking for, John Jones's choral arrangement of Amazing Grace, and I know it's the SKU, so I enter that SKU, and I get John Jones's Amazing Grace, and I get, something by somebody else for some other title, and maybe even a third thing that's not a match. I just need to report the John Jones Amazing Grace and know that that's not a glitch in the system. That's just a level of what do I want to say? A level of coding that our system can handle. It knows very well that you're reporting this title and it has this SKU, which belongs to the member publisher. It's not a one license SKU, it's a member publisher SKU. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's two ways. I hadn't thought about it, but that's two ways that you might find duplications in the database. And it's a very large database, so don't be alarmed by that. If there's ever anything that you're seeing in the database that you don't understand, feel free to reach out to a member publisher directly. We'd never stand between you and the copyright holder, but also that's why we're here. Feel free to reach out to us, send us an email, leave us make a phone call. We try to answer calls as they come in, but if there are voice messages waiting ahead of you, we try to take calls as they arrive. So if you have to leave a message, please do. As Madison said, we'll call you back. If there's ever something that you're seeing in the database that you don't understand, or if you're looking in the database and you're not finding what you're looking for, certainly that's why we're here to help you. And as I said, you can always reach out to the member publisher as well. Do we have anything else in our queue of questions?
I have one, Siobhan, that maybe you can take.
Sure.
If several parishes are coming together for a group worship service on a specific date, who has a responsibility to ensure that the reporting is completed? Who should have the license?
Oh, that's good. Kyle, you've been doing this longer than us. Do you have an insight into, like, say they were contacting you about GIA titles on this, on this occasion? Would that
Um,
make a sense?
I think of how to best. I don't think I fully. I'm sorry. I also took a sip of water, so.
Sure. All right, so let me speak generally, and then Kyle, I think you might have, I don't know, but you might have something you'd want to say specifically about GIA. So whoever is hosting the event probably needs the license. And if they're posting a video online, whoever is hosting that video on their website or social media should have that license. And then anybody else should share a link to that video. So several, like for instance, several area churches are going to do a choir concert together. I'm just going to assign some details to this sort of general question. But if several parishes are getting together to do like a choir concert, hymn festival or something, and they're going to prepare a congregational worship aid, then it would seem that the hosting church should be licensed for that. And if you, whoever submitted this question, if you are planning on doing that, feel free to send us an email or give us a call, because we might want a few more details from you before we say that's the general answer to your question. But just sort of generally speaking, wherever the license permissions are being used, that's the church that should have the permissions. I don't know, Kyle, do you have any, should I take that in a different direction?
I think that's very well said, Siobhan. And I'm sorry, David, I didn't mean to toot you on. It's just like, I think that you're absolutely right, Siobhan, that ultimately it's the responsibility is on the party that is doing the activity.
Okay.
They can't shuffle it off to someone else to maintain that, or to ensure that the license is in place. So yes, if they're the party that's streaming it out, hosting it, they're the folks that should be holding the license.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, these were some good questions. Thanks, y'all. As Madison said at the top, if you think about this later and you have another question, or if something comes up in the meantime, certainly feel free to contact us by phone or email. We're always happy to answer your questions. We're sort of self-selected to be, assisters. That's what we like to do. We like to help people. So don't feel like, your question is not welcome. It absolutely is. And we don't always have the answers to things. We're also happy to point you in the right direction if we can. So you're saying, well, I know the song isn't even covered by one license, but how do I do whatever? We're happy to, as best we can, we're happy to entertain those questions. And very often, we're sending you off to people like Kyle at GIA or Alex at OCP or any other member publisher. So, whatever your question is, we are happy to help. Okay, any last words of wisdom from anyone? Great.
I do.
Well, thanks, y'all. Oh, yes, please.
I just have two very, very quick things. I think that when I'm reviewing our manual title submissions, I will often get, I'll use one from our catalog as an example. Sylvia Dunstan's "All Who Hunger Gathered Gladly," which is a very popular sort of Eucharistic hymn text, and it's been set to a number of different tunes. And often I will get the same submission for this text with the William Moore "Holy Manna." I'm like, that's great that you're using that tune, but when it comes to our purposes of reporting usage and paying Sylvia Dunstan's estate, we don't care what tune it was used with. So as long as you're reporting that text, we're worried about the copyrighted elements. So if it is something else that's public domain that's with that material, whether it's the text or the tune, you can kind of ignore the parts that that doesn't belong to anyone else. That tune, Holy Manna, or any other public domain tune, that belongs to everyone. No need to report that on one license. So I just wanted to kind of offer that as a little caveat that I missed earlier when talking about titles. The other thing, one license, the FAQ page has a really fine example, and I should have mentioned this when we were asking about or discussing, how can you tell if something is public domain? Well, one license has an FAQ about that. So feel free to review that page. It is, how can one tell if a text, melody, or harmonization is in the public domain, free to use without permission? And there's a really good example there for how you can tell. So just wanted to mention that because folks don't always think about that FAQ page.
Yeah, so if you're on our homepage and you go all the way to the bottom, to the black border at the bottom, FAQs you can access them from there. Yeah, thanks for that shout out, Kyle. Good. All right, well, thanks so much. Our next call and response is October 17th. Is that the right date? I think that's the right date. And you'll see a link to register in our newsletter, which goes out next week. It's always the last Tuesday of the month. And we're always happy to take your questions. So thanks so much for being here today, y'all. Have a great day.